And here we are talking about a major decision. Hello, Mr. Murphy, joining us from the Iron Pig Smokehouse, the owner. We've had you on several times before. Great to see you.
Good to see you, sir. Happy 4th of July.
Thank you very much. Good to have you. This past week, the United States Supreme Court decided several things. The media talked a lot about the Trump immunity decision, but there was one decision, the Chevron decision, and I immediately thought of your case when it comes to administrative state, because we dealt with a lot of that here in Michigan. But if we can back up a little bit, the Supreme Court, and I know I have people watching in all very educational parts of the state and so forth, but it basically states that the administrative state is what? How would you describe what is the administrative state?
That's a great question, and what we always try to do, right? So I'm in the restaurant and bar business, and we always joke, always try and boil things down so the guy or gal on the other side of the bar can understand all of this stuff because it's so crazy. And what happened in Chevron years ago, back in the 80s, the oil and gas company, basically there was a Supreme Court case that was brought to them. And ultimately what happened was in this Chevron case, they said that deference should be given to the administrative agency that has either created the rule or created the law, and they are the experts. And the judge, specifically administrative judges, should defer to the administrative agency and give them deference, as in when they wrote that rule or wrote that law, they had the citizen's best interest at heart, ultimately is what it said. So moving forward, what that allowed is the administrative state to grow, the EPA specifically to grow in great numbers. And this has been precedent for a long, long time now. And a lot of people like myself have thought that if Chevron were removed or overruled, as the Supreme Court did this last week, it would allow people like me, the little guys, to have a level playing field again, because these judges now don't have to defer necessarily to the so-called experts, which are the heads of these departments. Now, it's not that these people aren't experts in their field. Gosh, we hope that they are, considering they're supposed to be experts and we're paying them with our taxpayer dollars. But these judges now don't have to give nearly all of the weight to the administrative agency, or more specifically, the director of that agency.
Okay.
So this was a huge win for the little guys. And honestly, what a lot of people haven't looked at is the regulatory capture. And we don't have time to get into that. But what happens is when these administrative agencies, they can be taken over by some of these large corporations with funding and dollars and these other things. So these big company or these big agencies like an EPA or an SEC, they can almost be taken over by the money that is actually they're supposed to be protecting us citizens from, which are these large corporations.
Yeah, I mean, so same thing probably like with the FDA, right? I mean, there's been so many stories with that.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, inherent corruption becomes a thing. That's why these agencies have grown in such power, is because of Chevron. All of these administrative judges, who are most times, almost all the time, appointees, especially here at the state level. That's why we never got a win against the Department of Agriculture, the Liquor Commission. OSHA was in here. OSHA was in here at one point. The health department. All of these folks reside in the executive branch. And these judges in the executive branch had to give deference to the executive branch agency and their director. So you can see how the scales of justice were really heavily handed and tipped towards the state and the administrative agencies. So this is a huge, huge win for little guys like me.
Well, here in Michigan during COVID, if you're in Michigan or whatever state you're in, but especially Michigan, it seemed like in the lawmakers should have been involved, but Governor Whitmer, I think many people had many names for her, but she acted like a king or queen, basically making rulings out of her office. And with a lot of the health departments, a lot of these rules did not come from laws or didn't come from lawmakers. Would that be called the administrative state, a lot of the COVID mandates?
100%. So
Yeah.
the executive orders that everybody remembers from March up until October, maybe 27th, when Mackinac Center and the Supreme Court, Midwest Health, that whole lawsuit took down
Yep.
the executive orders.
Yeah.
She then turned to the health department and the administrative agency, and Robert Gordon was the director at that time. And he just threw out edicts every week, every 2 weeks, there was something new. And we couldn't challenge that. And we always said that no judge in the administrative court wanted to be known as the COVID judge because they were appointed and they didn't want to stick their necks out. And what ultimately happened with us is we were thankfully afforded the opportunity to get to circuit court, where our local judge ruled in our favor because he saw how heavily handed and how ambiguous the laws were that the health department was using. And that's the problem with the Chevron deference, is it allowed the administrative agencies to, quote, fill in the gaps for legislation that was passed. In my opinion, poor legislation. With the health department one that was knocked down as unconstitutional, we always refer to as the gathering statute. The health director may limit the gathering of people for any purpose and may establish procedures. Okay. That was the law and the language that the legislature passed in 76 or 78. The health department filled in the gaps by saying curfews, sign-in sheets, 6 feet distance, vaccine mandates, all of those things that we now know did virtually nothing to curb the pandemic here in Michigan. But deference was given to the director and that department because they're the so-called experts. And no judge could really consider any other evidence other than the given evidence from our health department. So this is, again, it's a huge win.
And in your argument and many others, it should have been where lawmakers should have gathered in Lansing and they are the ones that should have made those decisions, correct?
So in my opinion, so the Emergency Management Act gives the governor, or actually on the local level, the official order, 28 days. They can do virtually anything. We see it up here in northern Michigan used quite a bit. When we have a snowstorm, they close down the roads and say you can actually get ticketed for out driving during an emergency order like that. 28 days, but they have to go back to the legislature to reauthorize into another 28 days. Whitmer was actually found in violation of that, and nothing was ever done. She was never held accountable. So in my opinion, you get 28 days with the EMA to allow the legislature to craft a properly worded and constitutional law to allow the health department to do these things. That's the way it was supposed to happen. But Governor Whitmer said our legislature can't act fast enough. In fact, that's still kind of the prevailing argument against removing some of these statutes, is the legislature can't act fast enough. And we know that's just not true. In 2024, they can meet via Zoom. They can do all kinds of things. And it's really sort of an affront on the legislative branch for the executive to say, no, I'm going to handle this in my way, not the way the people had intended, our founding fathers.
Yeah, and they can meet in the middle of the night at 4 a.m. and present some documentation and with an hour pass it. So
yeah,
it's that.
Amazing how that can happen.
Yeah, I know. Does the Supreme Court, the Chevron decision, since that's federal, can that, and maybe that's where we're getting to your information, can that have a local impact on state? Because that's a federal case, a federal issue. Does it have a state impact on all these sort of administrative issue concerns across the country?
That's another great question. And honestly, we're going to test that theory out. We have just applied for an application to bypass the Court of Appeals. So we have a lawsuit going on challenging the local health statute, which Judge Hunter just recently this May ruled is also unconstitutional. But he didn't address some other statutes with really ambiguous language where the health department could fill in the gaps, and we don't like that. So we appealed to the Court of Appeals, and just yesterday applied for a bypass application, which is actually what the health department did with our ruling from January of 2022 that gave us our big win and severed that law I previously mentioned, the gathering statute, at the state level. So the state level and the local level are now been wiped out. We're appealing to get the other ones looked at, and we will definitely bring in the recent Chevron deference ruling, as we have other cases The SEC ruling also. We may introduce, and we didn't talk about the Jarcasi ruling, which was another one which affected the administrative branch, which basically said people like me should have the right to a jury trial in an administrative procedure. And I was never afforded that in all of these administrative hearings that I always joke that we failed our way to the top and ultimately won. But we had to go through the ringer of all of that. And this other case, Jarcasi, is another blow to the great massive power that the administrative state says, no, administrative law appointed judge. These folks should get an opportunity for a jury trial. And I find this fitting on Independence Day. This was one of the 27 grievances in the Declaration of Independence was a right to a jury of our peers.
Yeah.
And that, again, is another huge blow to the power that the administrative agencies have.
So this might take a while to work itself out. You're going out there to try to, it's not only for you, but it sounds like you're doing this also to try to, for the whole state of Michigan, business owners, people, and this obviously costing you, there's lawyers and things involved. Why do it? Is it because just doing what's right, what you know is right?
It has always from the beginning been about keeping our business open, keeping our employees paid. I've always said it's on body cam footage submitted as state's evidence. I have a moral and fiduciary responsibility to my employees, especially. That's what it's been about. And we know that government doesn't relent power. We've taken it from them twice now. We want these things looked at in a proper way so they can't be abused again. And this last week, we got two really big arrows to put in our wicket or whatever they call it, to use to go after the power that these agencies have. And we're seeing it right now with the extraordinary emergency orders that were issued from the Department of Agriculture for dairy farms and chicken farms and these other things right here in Michigan. Yeah. I'm getting all kinds of stories hearing about, milk being poured out and all this other stuff. I
saw that. Yeah.
It's just, it's incredible the power that these folks have. And unfortunately, nobody else is out there with a case. There's one other case, T&V Associates, that I've probably mentioned before, that is sitting before our Michigan Supreme Court that they have not taken up yet. So we've given them another opportunity to look at these things and say, hey, wait, something's not right. The power needs to be returned to the people. And by the people, I mean to the legislature. And the legislature needs to recraft these laws. They need to get back to work, get off social media, get off your high horses, and rewrite these laws so these directors of these agencies don't have such immense power. And these judges now have a lot of their power taken away with these two Supreme Court rulings. So I wish that there was somebody else out there doing it. There had been some big names in our industry that were on the forefront of this back in 2020, and they gave in, they capitulated. Yeah. Some big names down there in Detroit. We had one of our big industry leaders here in Michigan, the Michigan Restaurant Lodging Beverage Association. I know I'm bumbling that, of course, but they were out there with a lawsuit right in the beginning. They gave up after their first loss. Joe Vaccaro down there in Detroit came out originally and said, I'm keeping my restaurants open. And less than a week later, he gave up. Those were people I was looking at, was like, all right, let's go. And then they just gave up. So I wish that there was somebody else out there other than me, more powerful, maybe more articulate, that can do these things in a better way. But this is what we've got. And I'm going to go forward because we've got some very, very compelling arguments that cannot be denied.
The other side I've heard is I watch all media, the Chevron decision. I'm watching MSNBC, and they're like, oh no, this will make all, businesses unsafe, worker safety. This is just bad for people, but they're not bringing up everything you just discussed. They're bringing up, they don't even talk about the money and the corruption. It's just interesting how people don't see all sides. It's just sad.
And I've been watching that very same thing, and I'm glad that you brought that up because it's fascinating to watch. And to me, there's two aspects of it. Those folks that are really wringing their hands and are up in arms and are saying, all the hyperbole that has come out since these decisions, the downfall of America, we need to add justices to this Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Those are kind of alarming things. Those are the folks that haven't read the Declaration of Independence and those 27 grievances, a right to a jury trial. It's kind of a big deal. These are also the folks that may be the ones benefiting from these large agencies and the power that they're trying to bring to bear. The EPA, again, one of the big ones that we're going to see when their power is taken from them. Because listen, this agenda moving forward with climate change, whether you're a believer or a denier, whatever it happens to be, and I don't care, the EPA is going to be a big player in that whole narrative moving forward, and power being taken from them is a really big deal. And I just see these folks as ones that don't understand what our founding fathers were trying to escape from when they were building this nation. And those are also folks that don't understand the separation of powers, a very simple idea that sort of changed everything for our country and what makes our Constitution quite uniquely different, specifically at the time, and has been a model here in the 50 plus states that we have and across the world. So it's something to me when I see these people so upset. It's like, well, this is how far we've come. And I don't want to use the C word, but communism may be really a big part of that, whether it's, neo-communism or whatever it is. But this large administrative agency that has such power was never intended by our founding fathers.
I think, last question, or statement, I think people realize what this is about when people contact me for stories or during COVID and they ask me, they're like, well, how did this come about? Can my lawmaker do something about this? And I'm like, no, this was an EPA. This was the FDA. And then they ask me, like, well, shouldn't my lawmakers be the ones involved? I vote for these people. I think they realized then that a lot of the things, especially during COVID, they learned what an administrative state was. So I think people are learning the hard way, maybe in some instances, that they think they vote for state legislators, senators, congressmen, but at times they aren't the ones making these rules. It is that administrative state. And it for the people, it's maybe the hard way. They're learning that maybe something does need to change. I've talked to several people who are like, oh, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and ultimately, it's about the intention of our founding fathers and our voices and how those voices are heard and reverberated through government. We should always have the opportunity to recall an elected official. And this is the other big part of it is these administrative agencies are appointees, whether it's the director all the way down to an administrative judge. The APA, Administrative Procedures Act, and all of these states are going to need some remodeling. With these recent decisions, there's going to be some things that are going to have to change, and it's going to be very difficult, and it's not going to be things that our legislators are going to necessarily want to do.
No.
But the power and the money specifically that comes into these agencies is incredible. We're nearly at the constitutional limit here in Michigan for executive branch agencies since Whitmer's created, the second education department and another, I can't even keep track of them.
Well, would the MEDC be part of that? They spend billions of dollars, but those are appointed individuals, I believe, correct? Because there's a lot of issues about the money that's thrown around, pork spending or project. 500 million there, 300 million there. That's from, that's not right.
You could, in my opinion, and I know some very good people that work at the MEDC, they do some good work. Some of it is also very questionable, but they dole out billions of dollars, and it's incredible. They're almost the marketing arm for these agencies is the best way that, in my opinion, that's the way that I look at the MEDC. And they're not the only ones. There's some other organizations out there as well. Yeah. But again, it's about the power. And of course, it's about the money. And these decisions from the top down with SCOTUS saying, listen, the fourth branch of government, as I call it, the administrative state, is going to need a redress. There's going to have to be some edits in this. We can't continue on this path and allow these agencies to grow in such power, because ultimately, and we see it now, they're crushing the little guys. I mean, they've been trying to crush me for 4 years, and I'm not the only one. We're now seeing it with independent farmers here in Michigan that are subject to these extraordinary orders, and they don't know what to do. And if anything, maybe we can illuminate a path forward for these people to adjudicate these things through administrative law and not have to feel burdened by these things. Because when you go into a court hearing like this, they have all the power, everything. The judge can sit there. They don't have. I sat in one of these less than 10-minute hearings and they fined me $5,000. Do the math on that. Less than 10 minutes, they fined me $5,000. It wasn't even on Zoom, Dave. It was a phone call. It was a phone call. But that was what had led me here today, was that ridiculous administrative phone hearing. And on the 28th day, I appealed that $5,000 decision, which led us to our first Hunter ruling overturning, which led us to our second win overturning the local statute. And now we're going to hopefully be heard at the Michigan Supreme Court level, where we can have these health statutes just completely eradicated, which will then force our legislators to do their job, put specificity in these laws. There's a speed limit on I-75 throughout all of Michigan. All of our roads have a specified speed limit. You know how that happened? The legislators wrote a law. I know it's not that easy, and I'm minimizing it, but that's what we need, is a little bit more specificity in these laws.
For example, to make it very basic, that would be like the state police randomly saying, we're bumping it to 90, or we're putting it down to 60 or 50 without any. It's a state lawmakers make that decision. That's a really simple explanation, but that's a good way to how to explain it.
And that's exactly what we say. In one instance, it was the state police, and then imagine giving power to the county. So your county sheriff can now come out and say, well, the state police said it's 90, but we feel that's unsafe, so we're going to say 65. And you have no idea, unless you happen to maybe pop on the local news, or maybe if you were on social media and you found out that there's an emergency order in Otsego County because traffic is so bad, the sheriff decided to lower the speed limit to 60. That's ridiculous. The law says 70.
Yeah, and when I was in the newsroom during COVID, it was so difficult. What county is doing what? It was a total disaster as to, okay, they're wearing masks, they're not, they're in school, they're not, what is this? It was insane, and hopefully it wakes people up.
I hope so too. I think a lot of people are. A lot of people have. I still think there are a lot of people that refuse to look at the new information that has been presented over the last 3+ years. And I understand and I feel bad, but they're invested in an idea, and more so the idea of fear driving their decisions. So I feel bad for them, actually, and I don't mean that in an arrogant sort of way, but I'm hoping that a lot of those type of people are open to conversations about other ways that government can control or mitigate these things. And that's sort of what we're trying to bring to light.
Gotcha. Well, you are a pioneer. I'll say it in this field. Not many standing up. So I appreciate it. I wish you well, your business well, and hopefully you have a great summer.
So far, it has been a great summer. The weather has been fantastic. We're right here in the Gulf Mecca. So anybody that wants to have a good time, come see beautiful northern Michigan. We're right off I-75, exit 282, right downtown. Come see us, ironpigsmoke.com. Buy some barbecue sauce. We'll ship it out to you. All of our T-shirts are right on there. Dave, thank you. I appreciate you, buddy, as always.
Okay. Thank you, sir.